Today's show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your online activity today and find out how you can get 3 months free at tryexpressvpn.com/space. That's tryexpressvpn.com/space for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Visit tryexpressvpn.com/space to learn more.
15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 10, 9. Ignition sequence start.
Space Nuts.
5, 4, 3, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Space Nuts.
Astronauts report it feels good.
Well, that's a great way to start. Hello and welcome to the 100th edition of Space Nuts, and you can hear exactly why we call it Space Nuts. Joining me as always is Fred Watson from the Australian Astronomical Observatory and our occasional guest, Mandu the cat, as in Kathmandu. Hello, Fred.
Hi, Andrew. I was sure you were going to press the stop button there, but I'm glad you didn't.
Oh no! I mean, these things happen for a reason. I thought that's just too perfect for episode 100. And congratulations and happy 100th, Fred.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? I thought when we started,
and happy 100th episode too.
Yes, I know. I'm older than I sound. I thought when we started this, we might get 5 episodes out of it before we lost interest. But yeah, it's hard to believe that we've got to 100.
Yes.
But even harder to believe that people are actually listening to it up to 100.
And they're even writing nice messages to us, which is even more difficult for me as a journalist to believe, because usually when I get a message, it's pretty scathing and below the belt. But it's lovely to get nice emails. Yeah, nice emails.
Right. So I send. We both send our greetings to all those people who listen to Space Nuts, especially the one who has been with us since episode 1.
Yes, greetings, Earthlings. Today, Fred, to celebrate or commemorate our 100th episode, we're going to look at myths. We're going to spend a bit of time on things people think they see on Mars. And that has actually spawned some science fiction films based on these myths. We're going to look at the moon hoax, and there are plenty of them, and Nibiru, this supposed planet that we've never seen that is orbiting the opposite side of the sun, I assume at exactly the same rate and pace and opposite position to us, but who knows. Anyway, we'll get onto that because that is huge. You put that in your search engine on the internet and it goes absolutely crazy with conspiracies, and there's site after site dedicated to that planet. So we'll look at that. But first, Fred, things people see on Mars, and the most obvious is the face on Mars, which led to a movie. I don't know which one it was, Mission to Mars, or there was another one released around the same time. But they found the face, and it was, the people who seeded Earth, basically. So what's going on Mars that isn't going on, basically?
It all comes under the heading, and this is a lovely word. The word is pareidolia. And pareidolia is our natural tendency as humans to see familiar things in unfamiliar objects, or to see familiar shapes, in clouds or landscapes or whatever. We can often identify things that we regard as familiar, and so we commonly have this tendency to make that association. Now, Mars is particularly fruitful for the art of pareidolia, or the science of pareidolia, because of course we can't get there. We can't just go and walk on Mars and say, well, this is not actually what you think it is. Although there are rovers on Mars, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen so much of this pareidolia in recent years. But you're quite right. The first, I suppose, really classic example of pareidolia on Mars was this ancient lava dome, which is in a region of Mars called Cydonia. It's was imaged back in 1976 by the Viking orbiter, and the low sun angle that this structure on Mars, was being illuminated by, gave it all the characteristics of a face. There's a darkened eye socket on one side. There's clearly a nose. There's a place where a mouth is, but the other side's all in shadow. And it looks as though it's a face wearing some sort of headdress as well. Very kind of characteristic of the sort of faces that we see in some of the ancient civilizations of the Earth, but people have left carvings and things of that sort. Except this thing is, can't remember. It's a couple of miles across, I think.
Is it? See, in the science fiction film, it doesn't look anywhere near that.
Yeah,
big.
I think it's probably even bigger than that. Thinking about it.
It's about the size of your average spaceship. Really.
I think it's I think it's a couple of miles an underestimate. I should have checked that, but it is.
But big. It is basically a trick of the light.
That's right. Yeah, and so it was such a. It became such a popular and well-known and highly believed feature of Mars that when NASA sent one of their subsequent orbiters to Mars, actually in the late 90s. This one flew in 1998, or it was in orbit around Mars in 1998. They actually changed its orbital parameters so that one of the first things it photographed was the face on Mars. So flew over the Cydonia region and took images. Sure enough, what we got was a nice image at higher resolution than the Viking images, showing basically just a structure. It is a lava dome, which gives it some symmetry, but it's got a completely higgledy-piggledy structure on its surface that doesn't look anything like a face. And then they did the same thing about 3 years later in 2001. So we've got this succession of images starting with a face that ends up with something that looks like a pretty smashed-in face if you're associating with that kind of thing. So yes, the whole Martian face thing was quickly debunked, but it's amazing how big an issue that was, because the myth that abounded about this was the product of an ancient civilization, a dying civilization. They set up structures on Mars resembling their features. Then just going on to what we were saying earlier, Andrew, that the fact that we now have rovers on Mars, and perhaps the three that come to mind most readily are Spirit and Opportunity, the two rovers launched back in the early 2000s, and Opportunity, in fact, is still working. Spirit's defunct now. And the Curiosity rover, which landed on Mars in 2012. So these are capable of really very close-up and high-resolution imaging of features on the surface of Mars. And the images that come back, which NASA, of course, make public very quickly, are immediately seized upon by the press to say, oh, look, this is such and such, or this is something else. And the one I like best, this is pareidolia at its best, because this looks exactly like what people are calling it, is a kind of teaspoon on Mars. It's this. It's a vein of harder material, probably a crystalline material, which is in something like sandstone, and the softer rock has been all eroded away, leaving this thing that is just like a spoon. So you've got this long handle, which is what supports it in the surrounding bedrock, with a bowl at the end of it, and it's just it's a fluke of the way this vein of harder material has been created, but it's exactly like a spoon. So that the press go mad about the spoon on Mars.
I've found a photo of it, and it just looks. It reminds me of the knife, which the butter knife you have up in the Warrumbungle Ranges.
Oh, the bread
your
knife.
Observatory,
the bread
knife.
That's right. Yeah, which
is just a rock formation.
Indeed, that's right.
This is similar, but it does look like a levitating spoon, doesn't it?
And it's clearly a fairly fragile structure. If you stood on it, it would just break off at the handle. But very interesting stuff. And then another one I liked was the thigh bone, and this is a piece of rock that's sort of just sitting in the sand there that looks a bit like the thigh bone of a large animal, probably not a human. It's a bit short for a human thigh bone. That one caught people's imagination. But then the list goes on.
Oh, yes.
I've got a list here of just a few. The Dark Lady, the Awesome Space Crab, the Jelly Donut. This is a good one, the truck wheel. This truck wheel, it kind of looks a bit like a truck wheel as well, but it's clearly not. The alien figure, the skeleton, the pyramid, they go on and on.
Oh, the pyramid, yes, I remember that making the news.
Yeah, that's right. Pyramid.
We recently talked about the piece of alien spacecraft that one of the rovers found, which turned out to be probably a piece of one of our own rocket.
It was
or
that's
landers,
right.
yeah.
It's a piece of the heat shield that was jettisoned on the way down.
But this has been going on for centuries, Fred.
Yeah,
because
I think so.
In the late 1800s, they were looking at Mars and they thought it was covered in canals.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. They thought they could see canals. That was Schiaparelli was or Schiaparelli, his name should be pronounced. He was the person who looked for that, an Italian astronomer. But just going back to the things like the spoon and that sort of thing, that they have a name. Those things, lookalike rock features, are called mimetoliths or mimetoliths. It's a word that's not commonly used, but it's a piece of rock that looks like something else. It basically mimics something else. And the most recent one, Andrew, and this is actually one that's come from I think Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter imagery of the surface of Mars, and the what has been imaged here is what is clearly a pit in the surface of Mars, an elongated pit. It's about a mile long, or 1.5 kilometers long. You can tell it's a pit because around it there are craters, and the craters, of course, are always crater shaped. So the way they're being illuminated tells you that what you're looking at is actually a pit in the surface. But at first glance, it looks like something sticking up. And in fact, it's got rather a bullet shape. And so the press leapt onto this and called it the alien mothership. And I've seen detailed images of this thing, which have got, arrows pointing to the panoramic control room at the front, the propulsion system at the back, the communications section in the middle, and then, renditions of what it would have looked like before it crashed. Oh, there's crash damage and all the rest of it as well. So that's the mimetolith gone mad. It's just, I guess it keeps somebody happy, but it's the way of, because we've got, we now have, we live in a world in which everyone is a journalist, or they think they are, because of social media. And so these things go viral on social media. And it's not helped by the fact that advertising revenue from social media is what drives these sites. So the more hits you get, the better off somebody else is. So the more bizarre you can make your story, then that is, that's the way things work. The more bizarre you make your story, the better things are.
Yes, it's not just restricted to social media, though. If you look at the stories and the publications, to use that term loosely, that put them online and in their papers, a lot of those publications are questionable at the best of times anyway.
Without
so they don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. No, I'm not mentioning any names. No, I'm a journalist that knows not to name names when you don't want to name names. But yeah, it's fascinating. And this will keep happening. This will just keep happening because we are alone, essentially, and we are looking for telltale signs of some other existence, or even if it's historical or extinct, we want to find it. So when we look at things, we do exactly what you say. We just try and make it into something. And at the moment on Mars, the only things that shouldn't be there, we put there. And that's the end of the story. Until we find evidence to the contrary. And so far, no. But it's a fascinating planet with so much to offer, and it's keeping us guessing a lot of the time. You're listening to the 100th edition of Space Nuts. Andrew Dunkley here with Fred Watts. Now let's take a little break and find out more about our sponsor. ExpressVPN, rated #1 by TechRadar. This is the one I use. I've been using it for a couple of years and I love it. When I joined ExpressVPN, they were brand new to the market, but I read a lot of reviews and did a lot of comparisons. And there was just something about their business model that I particularly liked. And a couple of years down the track, honestly, can't complain. Their interface is very easy to use. Their service is second to none. I've had to contact them a couple of times about certain things that I wanted to do, and they were brilliant. So you may be wondering why I do need a VPN at all. It's all about privacy. Do you really want big tech companies, governments and others knowing what's going on with your online activity? Even if you're having nothing to hide, it just feels downright creepy. I think you'll agree. And governments are getting more and more interested in what you're doing every day. And so, yeah, protecting your privacy is what VPN is all about. And how often do you run across websites that you want to get information from only to find that they're geo-blocked? This is becoming an increasing problem, but ExpressVPN solves that problem for you. Now, if you go to our special URL, you'll see quite a list of things this service can help you with, things you may never have thought of before. As I say, it's the one I use, secure, fast, and it just works. So protect yourself online today and find out more about how to get 3 months free at tryexpressvpn.com/space. That's tryexpressvpn.com/space for 3 months free with a 1-year package. Try expressvpn.com/space to learn more, and you'll find the link details in the show notes and on our website. Now, back to the show.
0G, and I feel fine.
Space Nuts.
The next hoax that we're going to try and dispel is that of the moon hoax or lunar conspiracy, whatever you want to call it. A lot associated with the Apollo landings. They've even made TV documentaries to prove that it was all fake. None of it happened. But there are so many. There are probably as many hoaxes involving the moon as there are Mars, I would imagine, Fred.
Yeah, that's certainly true. The moon is unlike black holes and in fact unlike Mars, things at greater distances. The moon is moderately accessible, and indeed we have accessed it. Although there is a significant fraction of the population. And it varies from country to country, but there's a significant fraction that believe that we never went to the moon, that humans have never walked on the moon. And it seems to go back. Remember that the lunar landings were between 1969 and 1972. The idea that it was a fake goes back probably to a man by the name of Bill Kaysing, who was born in 1922. He's no longer with us, sadly, died in 2005, age of 83. Bill was formerly an engineer, but in his later years, he got a job with Rocketdyne, which is the company that made the rocket engines for the Saturn V. And in fact, his job was not engineering. He was a technical writer for Rocketdyne. And he believed that he'd found good reasons why, the engineering of the Saturn V's rocket and all its subsystems wouldn't have been able to take people to the moon. It's funny because engineers are often the ones who propose alternative theories. I often get emails about relativity from engineers because, of course, relativity doesn't follow the normal intuitive way that we expect things to behave. And engineers are very firmly, of a mindset that's about how life behaves. I can say this
more rigid thinking.
That's right. Yeah, I can say all this. With some feeling, because half of me is an engineer. My PhD was on basically astronomical technology.
You must keep yourself awake at night a lot.
Oh, I do. I worry about these things. Anyway, Bill Kaysing, he became more and more convinced that it hadn't happened. So he wrote a book which was published, I think, in 1975. It was called "We Never Went to the Moon," and that's really what set all this off. The conspiracy became more prominent actually after the turn of the century. I think it was 2001 when Fox News made their they made basically a documentary called "We Never Went to the Moon," or "Did We Go to the Moon," or something like that. And the things that were cited as evidence for the whole lunar excursions, the whole series of them, being basically staged on a soundstage somewhere in America, that theory seems to be predicated on particularly a couple of things, but other things as well. People, they've highlighted all kinds of reasons why this was clearly a fake. One of them was the fact that with the Apollo 11 flag, the American flag that was planted in the lunar surface, it was seen to be vibrating or flapping. And people suggested that this was because they were in a studio that had fans in it and the wind was blowing the flag. Now, there is footage that shows it flapping, but
yes, I've seen it.
It's because the two astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they both had to try and push this flag into the surface because it was quite a tough surface, and to make it stick. And they were actually twisting it, and it's because it was twisting that the flag was actually waving. It doesn't stop immediately. It's something that when you let go of it, it keeps on vibrating for a short while. So, and
especially in low.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and clearly with no atmosphere. It's interesting because that's sort of borne out. The fact that they had trouble getting that flag in is probably the reason why, of all the 6 flags that were planted on the lunar surface, that's the only one that blew over when the Apollo lunar module, the upper stage of it, returned back to the mothership up in orbit, the command module. So the Apollo 11 flag is actually lying flat on the ground. It's not standing.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, that's because they had trouble getting it in. And the other thing that is cited very frequently is that the lunar daytime, because there's no atmosphere, you should be able to see stars. And indeed, you can see stars, but all the images that we see have got the exposure set so that you reveal the lunar surface rather than the stars beyond. And so the exposures are not long enough to show the stars. There are some exposures, actually. You can hunt around among all the images that came back from the lunar surface, and there are some which do show stars in the sky. I think they were taken in ultraviolet wavelengths, or maybe something of that sort, so that you see stars, but everything else is overexposed. So it's that kind of thing that people pointed towards, and I suppose the staggering thing is the way public opinion has varied. So, the Washington Post did a survey in 1994 that showed that 9% of those surveyed believed that the lunar landings were faked. 6% were unsure about it. 5 years later, a Gallup poll actually had it, I suppose fairly similar view. 6% of the people polled thought they were faked, and those with no opinion were 5%. But once the Fox network program had gone out, then the number of people who thought it was faked went up to 20%.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's right. And about the same time, a poll taken in Russia, the Public Opinion Foundation, had 28% of people believed that it was faked. So what's the answer to this? How can we prove that that humans did walk on the moon? It's pretty easy these days. I've always told people that asking a scientist if humans went to the moon is like asking a soldier if there was a war in Vietnam or something like that. Because we are immersed in the scientific data that came back from the moon. There were seismometers left on the lunar surface which record moonquakes, which are basically vibrations when the moon's surface is hit by meteorites. There are laser reflectors left on the moon's surface, and that's how we know the distance of the moon to a few centimeters, because we can beam lasers at these things and get the signal back. So all that science, plus I think it was something like 1/3 images, plus the testimony and photographs of 12 men, and they all were men. Hopefully there'll be women who walk on Mars, but all the men who walked on the moon. It's overwhelming evidence. Now too, we have imagery from Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. Lunar Reconnaissance, I can't say the word. Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is a spacecraft that is still active. It's orbiting the moon. It's a NASA spacecraft. Even when it was at its first operational height, which, if I remember rightly, is 50 kilometers above the surface, it was able to see the lunar modules sitting on the surface of all six of the successful.
I think they've since photographed Apollo 17 mission, the mission site, and you can see where they drove around in the dune buggy, the moon buggy.
Yeah, indeed. There's imagery of all those things. Actually, it's fairly easy to find on the web a lovely comparison of a Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter image of the Apollo 17 site, with exactly as you've said, with the buggy tracks and footprints and all the rest of it, and the lunar module sitting on the surface. That was taken by a Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2011. And compare that with a still from the video footage that the astronauts took when they were leaving the moon in 1972, and the two images are absolutely identical, as you'd expect, because nothing's happened on the moon since then.
No, but I'll tell you though, when I was a kid and this was all happening, my great-grandmother, who was still alive at the time, absolutely and steadfastly refused to believe that it was real. She thought it was just a big advertising stunt.
Yeah, I had a great aunt who was basically the same. She said she said the same thing. The bottom line, though, well, there are two overwhelming pieces of evidence. One is that I think it's something like 30,000 scientists and engineers worked on the Apollo missions, and
that's a lot of people to shut up, isn't it?
That's right. And scientists are not good at keeping things quiet. But the ultimate clincher, really, and it's a reflection on the political era in which all this took place. The ultimate clincher is the silence of the KGB, the Russian secret police. They would have been the very first of all, to know that things were being faked, but also to broadcast it. So the fact that there was no howl of protest from the Soviet Union as it was then is the clinching evidence that it really did happen.
Yes, indeed. And you're darn right, given the space race as it was in those days, any opportunity to debunk it would have been taken. And you're right, they didn't do it. The moon's always been captivating, and I cite a story that was advertised in 1835 where they publicised the fact that the moon was covered in bison, goats, unicorn, beavers, bat-like winged humanoids, and they published this in an article, and they took everyone down hook, line and sinker. It was believed beyond reasonable doubt that the moon had living creatures on it of that ilk. And elk. I suppose that kind of, or elk, I think that probably kind of got people in the wrong mindset from a very early period.
Maybe so. Maybe that's
and it was and we've been trying to debunk ourselves ever since. But the moon shots were real. Everything we've done since is real. The only thing that hasn't been, and they've proved beyond reasonable doubt that this was fake, was the Capricorn 1 mission, which was a movie. They were sending people to Mars and found out the life support wasn't going to last, so they faked the entire mission in a TV studio. Great movie. But I'm pretty sure it was based on the moon conspiracy.
Yes, it would be.
Moon hoax, right. Yeah. You're listening to Space Nuts. Andrew Dunkley here and Fred Watson.
Roger, you're loud and clear here also.
Space Nuts.
Last but not least, in episode 100 of Space Nuts, debunking myths, we're going to hone in on one of the more popular myths, particularly on the internet, that of the planet Nibiru, which a lot of people are convinced exists, but we've never seen it. It's on the opposite side of the sun. It's always in the opposite position to Earth, some theories believe. And yet there are so many people think that this is real, Fred.
That's correct. And if you go on the web...
I have, and it just...
it's
you
overwhelming,
put the word in there and you just go... The list is, I think it's longer than porn, of all these sites dedicated to the planet Nibiru.
So I was going to say, you can even find pictures of it, which is pretty good considering it doesn't exist. But let me tell, the most common picture that purports to be Nibiru is of a sort of, well, it's something that looks like a red star with a sort of brownish halo around it, and a few other stars in the image. This is a very well-known image made with the Hubble telescope, but it doesn't show Nibiru. It shows an object called V838 Monocerotis, and that is a variable star. That's why it's called V. It's actually the 838th variable star in the constellation of Monoceros, the unicorn. And what you're seeing is, in fact, the light echo around it. This thing has outbursts of light, which light up the dust cloud around it, and we see those after the star itself has settled down, because the light is taking a dogleg path to get to Earth. There you are, a quick lecture on light echoes thrown into Nibiru. It is not Nibiru.
I can dispel one myth automatically. Apparently, we were supposed to, based on our time right now, have been destroyed by Nibiru 3 days ago.
Yes, that's right. And I think several years earlier, I think we've been threatened with destruction several times. Any picture that you see of a sort of slightly vaguely hairy-looking brown thing with a red star at the middle is actually not Nibiru. The other thing that staggers me about the stuff on the web is some of it looks so professionally done. It's clearly done by organizations that have somehow got a vested interest in peddling this myth, and some very nice video simulations of orbits and things of that sort, all of which is completely fictitious. So where does the Nibiru story come from? It apparently goes back to 1995. And a woman in Wisconsin in America, her name is Nancy Leader. She runs a website which is called Zeta Talk. And that website, I think, is really where the origin of this story comes from. Apparently, the Zeta Talk website, if you read it, you find that when she was a girl, Nancy Leader received an implant in her brain from extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli, which is a star.
Sorry, so where was that again? You just dropped out a little.
Oh, sorry about that. So when she was a girl, she received an implant in her brain from extraterrestrials who came from a star called Zeta Reticuli. Now, Zeta is a star. It's a star in the constellation of Reticulus, the square.
It is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's right. Maybe that's where it comes from. But apparently, because of this implant, she's been talking to these people, these extraterrestrials, ever since. And so Zeta Talk is her website where she communicates what she's learned from the extraterrestrials, as you would do if you had something like that.
Absolutely.
But anyway, there is a picture of Nancy on the web. She looks very homely and very pleasant, but you don't see any evidence of an implant. However, the name itself doesn't come from Nancy. She apparently called her version of Nibiru Planet X, which is a pretty good name, really. There's been lots of Planet X's. I think at one stage Pluto was a Planet X as well. The name itself actually harks back to the work of an Azerbaijani American author whose name was Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia is also no longer with us. Born in 1920, died in 2010. But he was an author who wrote kind of, I don't know what you might call it, factual science fiction, something that seemed to have its feet in reality, but was actually fictional. And he postulated the existence of a planet that had an orbital period of 3,600 years, an intelligent inhabitant. So this is a planet going around the sun with this very, very long period and a very elongated orbit. So it's got an orbit that at its, a lot of the time it's way, way away from the sun, but periodically comes in to the inner solar system, a bit like the orbits of comets. We know comets behave like that.
Which would make it unlivable.
It would, yeah, that's right. You'd have such variations in, in climate and things of that sort that, yeah, unlivable. But despite that, he postulated the existence of intelligent inhabitants who may or may not threaten us, whatever, and postulated the name Nibiru. So this whole legend or myth seems to be a jumble of two different ideas. And I have to say, Andrew, that this is in many ways where our science, astronomy and space science, leaves itself wide open to the conspiracy theorists, because we always admit what we don't know. We say, well, we don't know about this. We've got inferences about this, that, and the other, but we don't know. And one of the things that hasn't helped with the Nibiru story is Planet 9.
I was about to bring that up. I told you I had a question, and we did talk about Planet 9 last year. And it has been making the news on and off for a little while now, because there is a common belief that there may well be a Planet 9, and mathematically could exist. So, yeah, that kind of messes the whole debunking thing up a bit. That's right.
But it's definitely not Nibiru. So Planet 9, just to recap, is something that's been postulated again, a long way from the sun, but a planet of the solar system, probably, if I remember rightly, a couple of hundred times further away than the Earth is from the sun. So maybe 10 times further than Neptune, which would make it very faint and very difficult to observe. And the reason why it's been suggested is because when we look at the orbits of what are called trans-Neptunian objects, these icy asteroids way out beyond the orbit of Neptune, those orbits kind of line up in an unusual way, and it's those alignments that suggest that they're being gravitationally disturbed by something relatively massive out of this very great distance. So a number of astronomers in the US have postulated that, and indeed there is work going on to try and find Planet 9. However, it's not Nibiru.
If we do have evidence of a Planet 9 because of the orbital disturbances and gravitational pull that seems to exist, would not the same effect be detectable with supposedly Nibiru?
Well, yes. I mean, the thing, what's happened, it's nowhere near as cogent as that, Andrew. The Nibiru story has got completely tied up with the Planet 9 story. Nibiru is supposed to hide behind the sun. That's the theory, as you mentioned at the beginning. Now, orbital mechanics simply do not allow that to happen. Gravitational forces disturb things in ways that are very predictable, and we understand all that stuff. There was a lovely quote from Brian Cox, which I'll proceed with a slight language warning here. He says, if anybody else asks me about Nibiru, the imaginary bullshit planet, I will slap them around their irrational heads with Newton's Principia. And that's delivered with an accent very similar to Brian's, because he came from Oldham, which is just over the border from Yorkshire, where I lived. So, yeah, Brian's got fed up of answering questions about Nibiru.
I don't blame him. To be honest, I don't blame him. But it goes on and on and on, Fred, and I don't think that our attempt to debunk it today is going to make it go away as much as we'd like it to.
I'm sure you're right. There are people who know far better than we do about things like this, Andrew.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. But, who knows what the next big myth will be. There's always going to be one. Whenever you're sort of boldly going where no one's gone before and finding things unusual, you're going to also find people writing weird and wonderful stories of
exactly. And if we astronomers were not highly upstanding, ethical people, we could have a ball, because there's so much in astronomy, that.
Yeah, I refer to the story previously that was published about all the unicorns and
exactly.
everything.
We could have a ball, but we refrain from doing that. Mainly because we're upstanding, ethical people. Plus, we can't see any way of making money out of it.
And that brings back those questionable publications I mentioned earlier as well. Well, we might wrap it up there, Fred, but it's been a lot of fun looking at some of these things. And look, we've only scratched the surface, I'm sorry to say, in regard to some of the myths and legends of the universe. But we hope you enjoyed it. And happy 100th,
Thank you very much.
Fred.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I look forward to the next 100.
Yes, or we might do one more. We'll catch you next time, Fred. Thank you. Fred Watson from the Australian Astronomical Observatory, and that winds up our 100th edition of Space Nuts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following us. We're getting a lot of great emails and messages and questions. We're going to try and get to them all. A couple of new ones came in just in the last few days, which are very, very good questions, which we plan to tackle in a year or two. We also say thank you to Mandu, the cat, for making a special appearance in episode 100. And we look forward to catching up with you next time on
Space Nuts. You've been listening to the Space Nuts podcast.
Mission complete, Houston.
Subscribe to the full podcast on iTunes, Audio Boom, and Stitcher, or your favourite podcast distributor.
This has been another quality podcast production from Sites.com.